Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week here at MMA Junkie, we take a quick spin through the biggest stories in MMA. On today's episode, Poatan, baby. Stone Hands was stone cold on Saturday night. Is he currently the best fighter on the planet? We'll talk about it. Diego Lopes gets down to 146 Thursday night. He weighs in at 155 Friday morning, and he wins a 165-pound catchweight fight on Saturday night. What? Yeah, it was crazy, folks. We'll talk about that as well. And another international fight week is in the books. We'll share some of the highlights. Hello, everyone. Gorgeous George here on the con, and look at the distinguished panel we have for you today. SBC creator Goes from MMA Junkie Radio. He's here in the fight capital in Las Vegas. Farah Hanoun checks in from overseas. It's always great to have her on the panel. And the MMA media titan is back. He is in Toronto after covering UFC 303 in Las Vegas. A warm welcome back to Mike Bond. Cold coffee is on the ones and twos. But before we get started, if you would kindly hit that like button, Fada would greatly appreciate it. In fact, why stop there? Smash that subscribe button while you're at it. You'll be thanking Goes later. All right, well, team, Alex Pereira does it again. The heavy-handed Brazilian delivered another incredible highlight for us, this time with his legs. Broken toes be damned. Eat this shin, foot, whatever it was, Mr. Prochazka. Simply amazing. What this man has done since April of 2023, holy cow. That's when they were scraping him off the octagon, by the way. That's one hell of a turnaround. But let's hear from the experts. Your reaction to Alex Pereira winning by KO. Mike, you were there. Let's give you the first take.
Yeah, what a brilliant, brutal finish, and even more impressive by what he said at the post-fight press conference, right? That he kind of set up this head kick as a tactic after seeing Jiri Prochazka's warm-up video in his locker room. It wasn't originally part of the game plan, and he thought he was going to overthink the low kicks and then went up high. I mean, it seems simple on the outside, but elite fight IQ, right? For him to acknowledge that just based off a little clip, most fighters wouldn't even be paying attention to their opponent. It's warm up and little videos like that as they're preparing to compete themselves. So that kind of just shows the level Alex Pereira is operating on right now. It makes the finish even more impressive in my mind. And yeah, even on its own, I mean, for him to go out there, the first fight, any questions about it being a early stoppage? Man, oh man, that was not the case this time around. Zero controversy, zero doubt about this. Alex Pereira, for sure, the better fighter compared to Jiri Prochazka. We've now seen that twice over, and the best light heavyweight in the world, obviously, and on his way to being one of the best light heavyweights of all time. Look at that kick. Just amazing stuff. Herb Dean probably let him take a few too many shots there, but given what happened in the first fight, I think maybe a little good to let it go there. So, yeah, I mean, the highlight reel just continuing to grow for Poatan, and he is a marvel. He is amazing, and it is so impressive watching him fight every single time.
Mike, what was the roar like in the T-Mobile Arena? You've seen many of these firsthand. I always say there's the connection of the strike or whatever it may be, the fight ending sequence. Then there's this vacuum where I think everyone gasps and then everyone yells out the roar. But what was this one like?
Yeah, well, we had the mini gasp before that, just seconds before, right at the end of the first. People thought it was maybe over there. I couldn't really hear the bell go off for the end of the first round. So for a second or two there, I think a lot of people thought the fight was over, but Gary saved by the bell, but just for about a minute or so, because right when the second round begins, he gets absolutely smoked. So yeah, I think it was just like a little bit of, oh, maybe like he'll recover. Will this be a comeback? Nope. Alex showed he didn't have enough time to recover there and just completely shut his lights out. It was beautiful.
They said it was heard around the world. What about in the magnificence that is Morocco? Fada, what did you think when you saw and heard this thing?
Yeah, I mean, it was a near flawless performance from Alex Pereira. Outdid the first fight, gets the knockdown at the end of the first round, finishes him 18 seconds in with a head kick. I mean, what else can you say about Alex Pereira? He has proven to be one of the best things to happen to the UFC in a very long time, probably top 3 best things to ever happen to the UFC. Absolutely incredible, considering that people consistently talk about the hole in his game when it comes to the grappling. We've heard DC talk about it a lot. They're wondering what it's going to be like when he gets challenged there, but he has so much confidence. It just seems like when he's in there, those leg kicks he throws, his striking abilities, patience, his confidence, he just seems absolutely unstoppable right now. And I know we're going to get into this stuff later on, but seeing some of the betting odds, he seems like he's an underdog in a lot of upcoming potential matchups, which I don't know at this point if I would bet against Alex Pereira. I didn't then, and I didn't in the first Jiri fight, but I just think the way this guy fights, the confidence he fights with, is absolutely incredible, and that was a flawless performance. I think outdid what everybody thought this could possibly be. So he's been spectacular.
Shout out to Cold Coffee on the ones and twos. As the panelist talks, we get the highlight. Not only does he provide it, he worked for it. You get that on this site, you get that on this show. That's what makes Spinning Back Clique such a quality show. Goes, how about you, man? I know you were upstairs, I was downstairs. I heard a big yell up there, but man, this was something else. Like, it still gives me goosebumps to see these highlights and to hear the experts talk about it.
Well, I think he's must-see TV, right? Whenever he's involved, the lead up, the actual fight, post-fight, he's just so entertaining, man. And in this particular fight, the way he stalks his prey, he's like a lion, he's just sitting there. He doesn't show very much emotion, and he's waiting for his strike. And when it comes, he takes advantage of it. But the patience is incredible. His timing is impeccable. This guy just knows fighting. Like, there's certain people that I think were born to do this. I think Alex Pereira is that guy. He's born to do this. Another thing that just sort of stood out that I think got lost in the shuffle for me, I don't really know what Yuri's game plan was in this fight. I mean, I know he's been wild in the past. He kind of looked that way in this fight. I think Pereira probably could have capitalized even earlier, but I like that he just took the patient route in this one and he was able to get it done. But you're right. I was loud. I jumped up. That's just kind of the reaction that I get from this guy. And you could tell he does the same thing to the fans. Like, this dude is printing money for the UFC.
We got a chat room that accompanies the show. I'll try to get to some comments and questions. Make them good, and you'll get some priority. We also have the other chat as well. Forget what it's called. Let's just space it. Never mind. Karate Ted Tune says a naked head high kick is hard to land at this level. Oatmeal 26s. How many guys have to get flatlined before they realize you can't stand with Alex? Super chat. That's what it was. It just hit me. All right. Go ahead, Father. What do you want to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that it's crazy how when you break down this fight and you're thinking like, all right, it's the leg kicks, it's the signature left hook, and it's like people can't stop it because nothing he does is telegraphed. Like, you almost know it's coming, but you don't see it because he doesn't wind up like crazy. He's not lunging in. His technique is so crisp that it's almost like Jiri knew what to prepare for and just couldn't stop it. Got dropped, got hit with the leg kicks, got dropped to the left hook, and then the high kick, which we know that Pereira has in his arsenal, but he probably didn't see coming because nothing he does is telegraphed. So I think that's what's amazing about him.
For sure. Clinical, surgical. I mean, there's not enough words to describe how great this guy is when it comes to the striking. I want to ask you guys, right before the show, I was kind of just, scanning around and stuff. And I don't know, something always bugs me about when other fighters kind of chime in and just force their way in. And I see it from McGregor. I saw something from Izzy, and I saw something from John Jones. What are you getting at, George? Just say it. All right, this is what I'm getting at. Is Alex Pereira the biggest star in MMA? And do these other guys sense it? That's why they try to run interference on my man's accomplishments. Mike, what do you think?
He's up there. I mean, it's hard for me to say anyone's a bigger star than Conor McGregor while he's still like semi around. But if we're talking about people who are actually active and fighting, I mean, yeah, it's got to be, right. Like, besides the outliers that we might see a couple times here and there, John Jones, who fights very infrequently, Conor McGregor, who fights very infrequently. Yeah, those guys have a bigger history in the sport and a more proven track record of being draws, be it on pay-per-view or in arenas. But Alex Pereira is no doubt on his way and might be there right now if you're talking about guys who are consistently fighting. I mean, what more do you have to say? They give him the call for UFC 300. Yeah. They're in desperate need of a headliner. Who's the first person they call when Conor McGregor falls out? It's Alex Pereira. So those kind of speak for themselves in terms of what the UFC thinks of the guy. Dana White was glowing about him at the post-fight press conference. We see that the gate from when Conor McGregor was supposed to be headlining this card didn't drop too dramatically. Yeah, it was like 4 or 5 million, but for them to still get the fourth biggest gate in UFC history with Pereira headlining, that again speaks for itself. So yeah, he's right up there. Maybe there's someone who could pull some metrics for someone else and prove me wrong, but judging off the eye test, what I see from our social media engagement, our video views, our story views, he's as intriguing for the fan base as anyone else in the sport right now.
Fada, would you agree? And I guess we'll be more specific. We know McGregor hasn't fought in a while, and John Jones he just dipped in once in the last 5 years as well. So maybe is it a 2-horse race, him and Makhachev or Poirier? I mean, what do you think?
I'm going to take a comment from over here. Ronald E. Smith says, most popular right now, yes, 100%, but the biggest star, no, it's still Conor, Izzy, and John Jones. I mean, I agree with Conor McGregor, of course, but I agree with the initial statement of the most popular right now. I think that's pretty true, especially how active he's been and the fact that he's been saving these cards and putting on the type of performances that he's been putting on. So definitely one of the biggest stars right now. I think it's something that we could observe moving forward in terms of whether, I mean, the pay-per-view numbers that do get revealed, social, all that stuff. But yeah, for sure. I mean, and the guy refuses to speak English, which is the best part about it. You know, he's sticking true to himself, not playing any characters. People love him for who he is, and he delivers every single time, delivers for the UFC in terms of stepping up, delivers in his performances. So it's inevitable for his star to just continue growing, especially putting on these type of performances.
Yeah, I think you mentioned Makhachev too, George. I think you could probably throw Max Holloway in there as someone who's up there. That would be pretty intriguing for the people. He's the one that kind of stands out to me as well in terms of like a draw. Sean O'Malley, I'm sure, is on his way. Not quite there yet, but Pereira could be someone. But yeah, he's like the one that we're seeing right now. There's already evidence. That would kind of be my thought.
He's got the nickname. He's got the face paint, the walkout. You know, I think it might be him, but what about you? What do you think, Goes?
I think he's the most consistent star they have, right? Like we see him on a regular basis. We were just at the UFC Fan Expo, right? And that's kind of like one of the gauges for me. When they're all lined up for autographs, I look at it and I go, well, whose line would be longest, right? That's probably who people want to meet, who's popping. That could be maybe more towards in his favor. But if there were 5 doors and you knew these guys were all fighting at the same time, would you walk through Poatan's door first before you would walk through a John Jones door or a Conor McGregor or an Islam door? Probably not. I don't think so, right? It just depends maybe on the opponent. So I think he's the most consistent star right now. But guess what? In one fight, maybe 2, he might overtake some of these names that we're talking about.
But I guess just to chime in a little more, I mean, how much longer does he have, right? He turns 37, I think, next week. So we talk about some of these other names, Islam, Max, Sean O'Malley. They probably have a lot more runway. Like if you had to invest stock into one of those fighters for the long term, who would it be? Would it be Alex Pereira, knowing that in that 1-2 fights, maybe he could lose some of the steam if the fight doesn't go his way for the long term. So that's interesting as well. I don't think he has maybe as long in the game as a lot of these guys left, because as amazing as this run in the UFC is being, this man had an entire career in kickboxing before this whole thing happened. So you'd have to imagine the longevity for him isn't a ton.
Is that why maybe they're throwing around the move to heavyweight? What do you think about that, Fada? Should he consider that? It seemed like Dana White gave us 2 answers or 2 versions of, you know, hey, this guy can do anything he wants, but maybe I don't recommend that. But what do you think?
Well, I think it's going to have to be something that excites John Jones. And I think if anybody can, it's Alex Pereira. I mean, based off of what we've seen, Jones's tweet and deletes, or actually he's kept a lot of his tweets recently, but based off of what he said about Pereira, it seems like he excites him a little bit more than a Tom Aspinall does. So John Jones at this point in his career, somebody who has nothing left to prove, needs someone that will get him excited, and Alex Pereira is that guy. If Alex Pereira can go on and defend his title one more time against an Ankalaev, because I do want to see that fight. I think one more title defense against like an Ankalaev, and whatever happens with Jones and Stipe, if you line that up timetable wise, yeah, it could entice John Jones. And if John Jones says he wants it and Pereira says he wants it, even though Dana White doesn't seem too on board, he could end up being a fan of that matchup. So you never know. I think at this point, because we don't know what John Jones's future is going to look like. I think Alex Pereira would want to move up to heavyweight regardless of who the champion is, Jones, Stipe, even if the winner of that retires and it ends up being Aspinall or Blades. I think he'd be down to move up to heavyweight regardless, because he seems to be wanting to make the most out of every single opportunity, racking up the belts, the stats, and all that good stuff. So that's what Pereira has done in such a short amount of time. So I don't hate it. I just want to, perhaps because Ankalaev seems like a clear-cut contender, I'd want to see that title defense, and then maybe we can see him move up to heavyweight. I'm not against it.
Mm-hmm. Goes, if he did go to heavyweight, John Jones is suggesting you got to go through Aspinall while I entertain Stipe. Do you like that, or do you say no? You just get the winner of Stipe and Jones, whoever that may be, and Aspinall be damned. You see how crazy that sounds because he's the interim champ. What would you do with him? Because a move to heavyweight just doesn't really seem realistic at this point in time.
I don't like it. I think every time they bring it up, he should entertain it. I think that kind of adds to his legend a little bit. But in reality, I don't think it's something he should do, especially given his age. There is the big fight, right? I wouldn't risk anything but that. I would maybe take it if it were John Jones, but I wouldn't mess around with those guys. Look, there's a lot of guys in the heavyweight division that aren't going to be really too interested in a stand-up battle. And there's some guys with some that are great stand-up fighters, but can also use some wrestling. So I just think heavyweight's bad news. I think he should stick around at light heavyweight. And if for some reason John Jones is still around and they just want to do that one-off, then I think you kind of ride off into the sunset and maybe give that one a go. But I'd stick at light heavyweight, man. Heavyweight's another deal over there.
Yeah, I agree. Sky V's and El Daddy, who we met at the UFC Fan Expo. Shout out to him. He came over and said hello. He says heavyweight is truly a different animal. Ankalaev should be next, then talk about heavyweight. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I actually think heavyweight should just be something in the distant, of his options. But again, like Mike said, he turns 37 next week. Is he running out of time? I don't know, but the guy is active, and that's a good thing. Jiri Prochazka, he said something that I respect. He says, I need to evolve or maybe just stop fighting. But what would you do next with the guy? And yes, let's take into consideration he just took a massive headache, kick to the head, probably has a massive headache still. Mike, what would you do with Jiri?
I think there's two pretty obvious potential matchups for him. It's either Jamal Hill or Jan Blachowicz. I think those both make sense. Those two recovering from injuries in their own right, whenever maybe the timeline works for like later this year, beginning of next year. I just think that makes sense. All top 5 guys, all are looking to fight Alex Pereira again. So I think you just kind of go in that direction and see how it shakes out. But yeah, I think Yuri's he's got some fights. People forget he only has 6 fights in the UFC, right? And 2 of them have now been against Alex, both the losses. So he's got lots of names he can fight. But I understand where he was coming from in that post-fight video saying that he needs to evolve. I mean, his style is so fun to watch, right? One of the most entertaining fighters in the organization. But as we've seen many times with certain guys like this, there is a ceiling to fighting with that style. And if you're going to go out there against freaking Alex Pereira of all people and fight with your hands down and be so reckless, it's just not going to work out for you, especially if you're not going to implement a high degree of grappling in that game plan as well. So yeah, if he wants to be that guy again, be that champion, he's got to change something up. You can't fight like this against a guy like Pereira. It might have worked against, Glover Teixeira, some of these other guys, but given what he's working with right now as the champion, he's got to change something up. But also for him too, I can't envision him getting another title shot as long as Alex holds that belt. He's in that kind of Rich Franklin zone, that Max Holloway, Alexander Volkanovski zone a little bit, even though not even that, right? Both got finished in the second round of both fights. It's not like one of them was a controversial decision or something. So he's got some work to do here, and it does start with figuring out what type of fighter he wants to be.
Mick Maynard's shoes, Sean Shelby's shoes, that's the man. He delivers for those on Sundays after these big fights. Let's go back to the chat room. Richie Elger says they need a Brazilian champion. Why sacrifice that? Huge reaction says Jones would fight Pereira over Aspinall without question. These fighters are very coy, I think, in their call-outs. You can sense who they want to stay away from and who they want to go after. I'm with you, Hugh. I sense that as well. Richie comes back and says if Izzy beats Dricus, he will then want Pereira at 205. Maybe not. I don't know. Strickland seems to be such a polarizing figure. I could see him wanting to run that one back. But what do I know? All right, we can always come back to comments, questions, or if anybody has a thought, because, man, Alex Pereira is great. We've definitely established that. It doesn't get old talking about him. But we got to talk about the rest of the UFC 303 card. Let's talk about the madness that was the co-main event. Diego Lopes defeated Dan Ige via unanimous decision. Yeah, you heard me right. He fought Dan Ige, not Brian Ortega. Who says the UFC doesn't have a super lightweight division? They agreed at 165 around 4 p.m. Pacific in the middle of the event. Lopez, sorry, they threw down. The fight was entertaining. The fans appreciated the effort. I want to talk about, this last minute switch. I'm going to go back to Mike. Sporting wise, the fight itself, how did it play out? How did everything, I guess, feel to you guys cage side as the news was coming? And then we'll reserve our thoughts and opinions on the legalities of putting a fight together and all that stuff. But let's go with that first, man. It must have been mayhem cage side.
Yeah, it was surreal to watch for sure, to see Dan Ige in there, right? Because usually when you're covering a fight week, you see these people every single day, media day, press conference, weigh-ins. Like, your expectation is to have it all build and then crescendo by them getting in the octagon. And we didn't see any of that with Dan Ige. We just saw him go in there and fight after he was off to the side all week and at home or getting massaged or whatever he was doing when the call came through. So yeah, it was pretty surreal to see him step in there, and he put on a very valiant performance. I mean, I think he didn't win the fight, but the fact the third round was his strongest round, and if this was a 5-rounder, I don't know, even on like that 4 hours notice, I think he might have had a pretty good chance at winning, which is pretty insane to think about. And in all honesty, he was probably more prepared for the situation, as I kind of put out there, than Diego Lopes was, because he was training for a fight on July 20th. So he was, gearing up for that. I know it was going to be a 45 fight, but he basically just fought like we say all the time, right? Like, if weight cutting didn't exist, you just put these guys in there at whatever they're weighing on the day. And if it's like around the same thing, a couple pounds apart, then maybe we see their best performances. And this was a pretty good performance from Ige, all things considered. Very well could have won if this was like a normal situation. So yeah, unreal type of stuff from him. And of course, Diego deserves mad props as well. He goes in there, completely different style than Brian Ortega, a guy with better striking than Ortega, in my opinion. And he put it on him for those first 2 rounds pretty well. So he's got to be proud of himself, given all the changes, up 20 pounds essentially from where he was first scheduled to compete on this card. Major props to both these guys. They deserve everyone's respect, and I hope the UFC took very good care of them for doing this.
Yeah, Mike, you were in the eye of the storm, the hurricane, the tornado, fill in the blank. The rest of us were at home. We're kind of looking at our phones, social media. Is someone trolling? Is this for real? For us, it was a different sense of madness. But when John Anik made it official, that's when we knew there was a switch. Let's go to that. We have from the broadcast, we have a video here of John Anik breaking the news to us.
We got some breaking news right now. So UFC 303 live on pay-per-view tonight. Brian Ortega is out of the co-main event against Diego Lopes. He had a fever of 103 degrees. After the weight cut, he was sick into the evening, woke up, he was still sick. And that brings us to what we have now. This is an unprecedented situation because Diego Lopes is still fighting. Diego Lopes, we're going to show you, making his way to the arena. He had to re-weigh in, and he did so at 161 pounds. So here's Diego Lopes re-weighing in, and we have an opponent. And it's Dan Ige, lives right around the corner. What? Now, he was going to be, Joe, the co-main event 3 weeks from now on July 20th, so he had already been sanctioned. He showed up, weighed in at 164.5 pounds, which means our new look co-main event is a catchweight bout between Dan Ige and Diego Lopes. Ige has said he has been waiting for his whole life for this type of opportunity. And here's the text from Ige to Hunter Campbell. I've been in camp for 3 months. I'm the healthiest I've ever been. I can fight this guy tonight and beat him. This is what legends are made of. I am ready. I'm in great shape. Please don't take this opportunity away from me. And for Diego Lopes, I mean, all credit to both of these athletes, but Diego Lopes made 146 pounds this week. Then was told to rehydrate and fight Ortega at lightweight, and now he's going to fight Dan Ige.
Well, I'm all in. I love it. I love the fight. I love the matchup. Dan Ige is a straight-up killer, and I think Diego Lopes has world championship caliber potential. I really think that guy is something special. And Dan Ige, if anybody's going to derail the hype train, Dan Ige's your guy.
Hey, Joe, I was waiting. Like, when I found this out a couple minutes ago, I sent Sean a message. I go, wait until Rogan finds out. And then the whole time your face was doing exactly what I expected it to do.
Rogan's been with the UFC since like UFC 12 or something, like the late 90s. Even he couldn't believe what he was hearing. You've obviously been a fan for a long time, covered the sport for a long time, but man, go back to Saturday. Was this crazy or what?
Yeah, it was like a movie, right? I mean, it's just something you would not expect. But actually, we talk about what Dan Ige did, and what he did was absolutely phenomenal. It's crazy for him to do something like that. But, Diego Lopes, too, he's getting the short end of the stick as well. Like, both these guys deserve almost like a mini BMF title or something, because what they did was pretty insane. And for them to go out there and the actual fight, sporting wise, honestly, it kind of left me wanting more. Like, it kind of made me think I want to see this again, but with both guys preparing for each other. Because look, this is a dangerous sport, man. There is a reason why we have training camps. There is a reason why we look at footage on different fighters. It would be interesting to see these guys lock horns again, but props to both guys for even doing something like this. It's absolute madness.
At least like a BMF medal or something, right around their neck.
Yeah, give them that.
But they're not going to get a belt last minute. Can you guys get these guys some medals or something? Fada, let's go to you. Your reaction to that, and then I want you to pivot and tell me, should they do this matchup again? Let the guys go in different directions, because Lopez is saying, how about Volk? How about Ortega at the Spear? He's a Brazilian fighter residing in Mexico, so he's got a little bit of that Mexican in him, But what would you do in this situation?
Well, yeah, first of all, it was absolutely crazy, and props to both men for doing it. And regardless of this situation, when you just look at it from a ranking standpoint, the fight kind of made sense. Now, obviously, none of them anticipated it. And obviously, Dan Ige stepping in on 4 hours' notice is insane. But considering that Diego was expecting to fight Brian Ortega, which was a big leap up in competition. We've seen that happen in the UFC before when somebody performs very well, who's coming off of back-to-back first-round finishes. That you get a big step up in competition. But rankings wise, it actually made sense for him to fight Ige. But considering that he was expecting to fight Brian Ortega, I think, and especially after the fight week that he's had, accepting everything, he hasn't said no to anything, weight changes, opponent changes, stayed on the card, essentially saved the co-main event, competed. It was a massive risk for him. He had a fight with a former title challenger. He was talking about a title shot with a win. He thinks that if he had an impressive performance against Brian, he could get a title shot. Then he gets Dan Ige, who's a very tough guy, not an easy guy to look good against. And we saw that because Dan started to gain a lot of momentum in the third round. So I think they'd be doing Diego Lopes a little dirty if they were to run that back. I think he deserves to get rewarded and get that Brian Ortega fight again. Now, of course, we had heard that Brian told Mike Bond that 155 was the fight he was originally supposed to have. So I'm not sure what's going to happen with that. So if it isn't Brian Ortega and Brian Ortega ends up fighting somebody else at 55, I think Diego Lopes needs to be rewarded with another top contender if he can get that fight, just because of everything that he's accepted and everything he's been willing to do. So I think it will be a little bit unfair. And for Dan Ige, I know he was booked against Chepe Mariscal. I found that matchmaking a little bit odd. So I think, excuse me about the background noise. I found that matchmaking a little bit odd, the Chepe Mariscal fight. Dana White said, they could revisit that matchup since he was already booked for that. I think Dan Ige needs to be rewarded as well. He talked about wanting to fight in the Sphere. So did Diego Lopes. Dana White agreed to the both of them, but I think they should fight other people.
All right. Mike, just one quick question for you. Was he just randomly sick, as all of us just get sick once or twice throughout the year, or was this related to weight cuts and all that? Do we know?
I haven't been able to really find out. It's kind of still up in the air. I mean, the information we do know is that he had 103-degree fever, which is obviously something you probably can't be fighting with.
Right.
Was it related to the weight cut? Was he already sick when he took the fight? I'm not sure. Those are things that he will have to answer, but there was definitely a little something off about Brian all week. I don't know if that weight cut was just really hard on him, but you look at the press conference, like one-word answers, one-word comments, the media day, he was a little better. Got him to open up when he was telling us the story about his purge walkout against Volkanovski and how it stemmed from him essentially wanting to kill his upstairs neighbor. So that was interesting. But yeah, he just seemed slightly off all week. And again, I don't know how his bulking was going, if he was moving up to 55 for September 14th at Sphere. Maybe he just had to revert too much and it was just too much to ask. But in that event, obviously he shouldn't have taken the fight. But we see stuff like this happen fairly routinely. It's just in most situations in this one they decided to try to put someone in on 4 hours notice, which is just crazy and unprecedented. So hopefully Brian's okay and wish the best for him and stuff. Diego, very classy at the post-fight, saying he holds no ill will, all that stuff. It would be great to see him get that opportunity again at Sphere, but if I'm Diego, especially committing to fight again at 145, if Brian can even make that weight again, seems a little risky. And I'm sure Diego, like, fighting on that card would be an absolute dream come true, right? And if I was him, I would maybe want to look for a little more reliable of opponent. Certainly Dan Ige would be that if they wanted to do that rematch, but I completely agree with Farah's point as well that it would be kind of harsh for Diego to go from doing all this stuff, all these circumstances. Originally, he was supposed to get this huge leap up in the rankings, and then now you're like, hey, rematch a guy you just beat. So hopefully he gets someone in that top 5, someone that makes a little more sense for him.
Yeah, get well soon, Brian Ortega. You know, you put in a lot of time to this sport, and coming in, man, like whatever happened, that's a lot to deal with. He did not look alert all week for sure. I think Joe Biden looked more alert last week than Brian Ortega did at that press conference. But all right, let's go to goes here. Ian Gary versus Michael Page. You agree with this decision or not? Ian Gary won 29-28. Looked like MVP had no problem with it, but it really was a tough fight to score.
Yeah,
it bordered on kind of boring, but I kind of found it tactical because I felt like it was 1-1, and I don't know. I mean, what were your thoughts? And tell me about the decision.
Yeah, and first of all, thank you, Lazy Bed, for the super chat. He says, Farah the GOAT, GG and Goes are OGs. Bond brings the heat. We appreciate that. We love doing the show. And at the UFC Fan Expo, so many people came up to us talking about the show. So we totally appreciate your guys' support. The fight itself, George, it was interesting for me because I felt like we saw 3 different fights, right? And we all knew, like, going in, it could be the opportunity for a snoozer, and I feel like at moments in the fight we did have that, but in other moments there was excitement. That's the thing about Michael Venom Page. He can kind of bring the heat when you're least expecting it. It takes time when you're fighting him to find the range, to figure out what exactly is going to happen, because this dude is so fast and he can hit you from so far away. And I think Ian Gary kind of found that out the hard way. And he had to kind of make the adjustment in his strategy the same way Michael Venom Page had to do the same. So very, very tricky fight in the end. I thought it was entertaining. I thought Dana White kind of said something a little interesting, and he thought maybe it could have been a draw. The more and more I think about it, he might be right. It was kind of close there, but I was okay with
draws too. I hate draws, but when he said it, I go, he might have a point, man. Because at the end, we were like, one guy's just hanging on the other one, and he goes home with 2 bonuses. The other guy goes home a loser. But I really didn't sense that someone got their ass kicked. You know, I mean, that's not the ultimate criteria in a fight, but geez, like, I don't know. I felt more confused. Again, I'm not calling the fight boring. I was enthralled in it because I didn't know in what direction it was going to go. But holy cow, that was a tough one. What's next for Ian Gary? Mike, what would you do with this guy?
It's funny we're talking about this because I just saw a post from Barstool spinning back fist, and the comment on the top of Ian Gary's celebration post is, "You talk like Connor but fight like Bilal," which is kind of a funny one. But anyways, I mean, for Ian, like, this was an okay fight. I'm fine with it. I mean, the narrative would be very different if he finished that choke in the first round, which I thought he was going to do. Like, they were facing our side of the cage on press row, and that was under the chin. That thing looked deep. I imagine Joe Rogan said it was over about 18 times during that sequence, but I haven't heard the broadcast yet. So either way, good win for Ian, 15-0. Michael Page is always going to be a difficult fight for anyone, right? Like, in terms of, it's really hard to look impressive against that guy. The only time he's been knocked out was like one of the craziest anomaly type of KOs from Douglas Lima that we've had before. So he's a tough guy to put away, and for Ian to beat him, good win. And now I think he just moves forward into like a top 5 kind of fight. I'd look at Colby Covington again, even though Colby made it very clear in his interview with Submission Radio overnight that he does not want to do that fight. But if I'm Colby as well, I'm licking my chops now, right? Like, I thought Ian, maybe in terms of like his public perception, took a bit of a step down in terms of the skill set on this one. I don't know how that translates against someone who obviously has the complete different style from MVP like Colby Covington would. But yeah, you got to give him one of those guys. I think Usman or Covington makes sense. I know the Shavkat Rakhmonov one was floated out there. That would be super cool. Combined 33-0 in MMA between those two, which would be pretty special to have that fight. But I think you wait on that one. Like, I think Shavkat needs to fight the winner of Bilal and Leon. He's deserved his shot. And then Ian gets one more. You put him in there. That could potentially be the way to go. Who knows what happens if Bilal wins against Leon, if they would do a trilogy fight right away. That's all up in the air right now. But if Leon wins, I think Shavkat's the guy who's earned the shot. And then Ian just comes up right behind that in terms of getting one more win, and he's in there.
Great stuff from the money man, Mike Bond. Big shout out to Brian John for that super chat. He's calling you the money man. I like the MMA media type. This guy is as good as it gets in the MMA media space. So we'll have to talk about it. Goes, what were you going to say?
Are you okay with that, Mike, or do you want him to up it to 303? What we do?
No, I'm good with that.
Mike is the money man. That's
He
true,
is,
man. The bonus guy, the bonus advocate. Fada, what would you do with MVP?
That's a good question. First of all, I just wanted to comment on the fight. We should have known when Ian had Damian Maia in his corner what his game plan was going to be. But listen, he fought smart. We can't fault him for that. I mean, I had asked MVP if he thought any scenario that this could be a boring fight, and he said no. I mean, he's like, Ian Gary's not Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. I think he was talking about from striking ability and whatnot, but Ian did what he had to do to get the win. And it's crazy how that mistake in round 3 by MVP cost him the fight. Essentially, he had top position. I thought he was winning the striking exchanges in round 3 before he ended up in top position, and then he lets Gary up thinking, you know, that's where he has the advantage, which was proven throughout the fight, but ends up being costly because then Gary gets control on the ground. So pretty crazy that MVP was en route to winning this fight. So I don't know if his stock dropped like too much in that performance because, like I said, I felt like he was en route to winning. Who do I match him up with? That's the thing, you know, the Wonder Boy fight now makes sense that he's coming off of a loss. He seems to be pretty against it, and Wonder Boy says the same thing. He agrees two positives don't necessarily make a positive, but I think that's the fight to make when you look from a ranking standpoint, because MVP, as I noticed from social media comments and everything like that, fan favorite, very popular. Not only because he was fighting Ian and what people think of Ian, but people seem to really like MVP, especially those that didn't follow his career too extensively in Bellator. So he is emerging as a fan favorite, and you want to give him a name that will get people excited. Regardless of the matchup itself, you want to give him a big enough name, and Wonder Boy is that name. So I think I wouldn't be against that fight.
Fada, I don't want to be negative, but I think it's two negatives don't make a positive.
It wasn't me. He said two positives don't make a positive. It wasn't me.
Well, as long as you're positive, then we're good with that. Guys, tell me what else stood out at UFC 303. We got to give some love to maybe anything else that you may have witnessed there through this tremendous fight card that culminated International Fight Week. Let's go back to Mike Bond. What'd you see?
Ah, man, don't try to be like negative here, but I think to me the like storyline that stands out, and I think we just got like some more further confirmation this morning that builds on it, is like the Jackson Wink Hall of Fame trio on this card, right? Of Michelle Waterson, who of course retired after the fight, Andrei Arlovski, as we see there, who is apparently not going to retire, but has fought out his UFC contract, 42 fights in, and plans to continue fighting elsewhere going forward. Going to be interesting to see who he land or where he lands. Then Cub Swanson, who lost a split decision in the fight of the night. All three of those fighters were kind of building blocks for the Jackson Wink gym. They're all in their individual gym Hall of Fame. I know that Andre has been gone for a lot of years now, as is Cub Swanson, but Michelle Waterson's still there kicking it. And it's unfortunate because I asked Michelle about it and Cub about it at Media Day, and they're like, it's going to be so good to reunite. We're all in the same locker room together. It's going to be such great vibes. And then all three of them lose. So that's kind of unfortunate to see, but credit to Michelle Waterson. I mean, completely undersized strawweight for the entirety of her career. If you want to see the pinnacle of Michelle Waterson, go watch her fights in Invicta at atom weight, especially the one against Jessica Penne. That's really like her prime form here. So credit to her for kind of having this type of run. I know it ended ugly, 1-7, as you know, it seems to end for a lot of these big names on a losing streak, but that's just the way it goes. And all class to her for how she's performed, the fight she's taken. Wonderful fighter, but an even better person. And we'll see what happens with Andrei Arlovski, man. I just hope he doesn't end up in like a BKFC or something, because we've seen him take a lot of damage. And it would actually be kind of interesting though to see him there, because he has become so like anti-action, clinch, wall install type of stuff. To see him in a fight like that would be kind of interesting. And then Cub, I think Cub has probably the most juice left in him at this point in terms of like what he can do. I think can still beat some guys. You could argue he should have won this fight. Another fight of the night for him. He has now tied with Max Holloway for the most performance / fight of the night bonuses in featherweight history at 10. So he's still good. But yeah, that was kind of what my takeaway was from all these like non-prominent fights on this card.
Danny Segura was telling me the same thing. He goes, I think Cub won. I'm gonna have to go rewatch it because it was all part of the watch along. We just didn't have enough time to really go back and look at stats or anything like that. But
part of
MMA Decision says the same thing. Go ahead, Mike.
No, I was just saying, I feel like I missed part of it too, because that's when all the Dan Ige like chaos was going on right now. It was when like things were kind of getting finalized and confirmed. So I need to rewatch that one as well.
Shout out to Muna Okachi coming in with the super chat 303. Says, why not? That's probably a reference to Mike Bond. We got to book Mike Bond more often, man. These super chats are coming in. But let's go to Goes. What else was you want to highlight? What stood out for you? UFC 303.
Joe Pyfer gave me nightmares. That dude is an intense dude, man. Like going into the week, the things he said in the cage afterwards. I mean, that KO was so nasty. I loved the way that he was able to channel his intensity. To me, I feel like that's an evolution in his game. He took his time this time, and he still got it done. And then afterwards, a nice little call out, whatever you want to call it, Paul Craig. I love that. I love when the fighters do the matchmaker's job. I think it gets us all fired up. I think it gets the fighters fired up. George, you spoke to Paul Craig. I don't know about you guys. I'm down with that fight. I think that'd be fun.
Yeah, I wish I had spoken to him afterwards just to get that reaction. We had actually a good chat about light heavyweight and middleweight, but I think he would be down. That's an intense individual. They're both intense individuals. So I'm totally in. How about you, Fada? Who stood out to you, UFC 303?
Well, first off, I believe Paul Craig did say he was down. I saw something floating around on social media.
Oh, okay.
So it seems like, yeah. But the fighter that stood out for me, Peyton Talbot, he's got star potential to come in as a minus 1,600 favorite. Like sometimes I find the odds in general disrespectful when they're that lopsided, especially that he's early in his career. He fought every bit like a minus 1,600 favorite. I mean, the guy was making YouTube videos of giving his opponent a tutorial on how to beat him, even translated it to French. I mean, he's got star potential. His fighting style is very exciting. I have to admit that I was surprised a little bit with the matchmaking, and that's no disrespect to Yanis Famoudi, just considering that his UFC debut was a bit anticlimactic. He was coming off of the dominant win, Talbot, over Cameron Simon. I expected a different kind of matchup, so I was surprised with this matchmaking, but he kind of showed why he was a minus 1,600 favorite, got a very quick finish, as you can see here. Perfect timing with the footage. Sky's the limit for this guy. He's growing in popularity. He was just skateboarding with Tony Hawk. He's got an interesting look. He's got a very entertaining fighting style, and he called out Adrian Yanez. I like it. I know Yanez was once in his shoes, that rising contender that's exciting and putting guys away. I like that fight. So if they make that fight, I think it would be a good step up in competition for him, because it will be interesting to see how the UFC want to build him. I know he hates the Sean O'Malley comparisons. I think the hair automatically makes people want to compare them, but Sean O'Malley, we've seen him get built slowly, and I felt like with them in that matchup with Yanis, that's what they were trying to do with him. But when you go out there and get a 19-second finish, you got to get a step up in competition. So it'll be interesting to see where he goes, but I'm very excited.
Good stuff, guys. I'll do mine quickly. I like Jillian Robertson. She's won 4 of her last 5. Of those last 5 fights, the last 4 have been in her return to strawweight. Her only loss being to Tabitha Ricci, who's 5-1 herself at strawweight. So no shame there. I just love her intensity. She goes after it. Of her 14 wins, she's finished 11, and she tried. I mean, look at Michelle Waterson's face right now. She tried. She tried to put it on her. She had some dominant positions. She just couldn't get it done, but it wasn't a lack of effort. I'm glad that she dropped. This seems to be a natural division for her, so wish her the best. She's got a great coach too, and Dean Thomas. Mike, you're getting close to the mic. Did you want to say something before I move on?
No, I was just saying.
Okay.
I just like the matchmaking here, actually, especially if Conor McGregor was on this card. It would have even been a bigger showcase for a guy like Talbot. And as far I kind of alluded to, you don't usually see guys this big of a favorite and then go out and literally like deliver to what the odds are perfectly. I mean, could you ask for more from a guy who's that big of a favorite, goes out and essentially one punches the guy? So good stuff.
Beavis and Butthead in the chat says, who does the SBC video thumbnails at MMA Junkie? They're very good. Kamikaze. Abby Subhan does it for us, and yes, he does kill it on that front. Oatmeal26 says, still a hottie. I can't see her on a team like a Shanko. So I think Laura is what he's talking about. He's probably talking about Michelle Watterson maybe moving into the broadcast booth. Yeah, give her a shot. We'll see how she does. We got to move on, though. We brought up that Lopes and Ige fight. We covered, obviously the competition side of it, but let's cover the other side, the health and welfare angle to it. How do we feel about Lopes and Ige last minute booking, right? So the NAC had to oversee this whole thing. You can't just think of a crazy scenario like Hunter Campbell did, which came through. I'll give him his props, without having to go through certain steps. Is it a bad precedent? Excuse me. Are there potential problems? Fada, what were your thoughts from that side of things?
Well, the whole theme of this event has been scrambling. So I think them handling the situation for the first time, it's just, I mean, not the first time in terms of trying to scramble for a fight, but having somebody step in on 4 hours notice. It's interesting, the protocol. I believe if this scenario would happen again, maybe they would go about things differently, but it just seems like with everything they've gone through with 303 and the amount of times this card has changed, they were at a point where anyone who wanted to fight, and to have Dan Ige to even accept, and that was, yeah, when do you often find somebody that's going to be willing to step in on 4 hours notice? So I think uh, it's interesting, like how everything went down, because obviously you want to make sure they're medically cleared and whatnot, which was the case, I guess. But I'd have to go back and like see everything, because I missed some of the stuff. I was surprised with the news as well. But I think for the UFC, everyone was caught by surprise, and everyone just wasn't sure how to handle things. But moving forward, I believe there probably could be a different protocol when a situation like this happens. But the fact that Diego Lopes was willing to fight, the fact that Dan Ige stepped in on 4 hours notice, I think the UFC at this point, after having the co-main event changed multiple times and people in and out, I think that for them, Dan Ige stepping up, that they were going to go with it right away.
Mike, what are your thoughts on this? I'll give Dan Tom a shout out. He's always talking about it's this UFC schedule that puts pressure on the UFC to scramble. Even going back to last week in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, a lot of scrambling, guys getting moved around, getting, guys taking flights Wednesday night just to make it to so they can get iced on Saturday, afternoon. I kind of don't like it. As a fan, obviously, I'll watch any two people fight. If Strickland wants to get down with DDP in the stands again, all right. Who's gonna not pull out their phone there? But at the same time, I just feel like, like I want to see guys and gals at their best. Your thoughts on all this, the way it went down?
I kind of love it, to be honest. I mean, this is old school MMA stuff here, man. Like, this is, stepping up, no notice, fighting multiple guys on night, and freaking Pride back in the day, they would show up on fight week and you wouldn't know your opponent till like 2 days before in some instances. So this is what this whole industry and sport was built on. So on that side of it, I thought it was kind of fun. If it was happening every single week, like this Dan Ige situation is obviously super unique and uncommon. You were referencing to like Anton, or to what's the guy in Saudi Arabia who stepped in, Tricoli or whatever his name is.
Tricoli,
yeah, that was like a little bit different. I don't love that either. Flying across the world, cutting weight twice in essentially 2 weeks. That a little less, a little more suspect in my mind. But here, this was like very rare, right? Because you have all these situations that seemingly happen all the time. Like a guy misses weight or something, or a fight falls apart on weigh-in day, and everyone gets their Twitter fingers out and they'll say, I got my gloves ready. UFC booked me a flight. I'll be there to fight tomorrow. And you're like, well, weigh-ins are already over. This can't happen now. Like, you can't step in beyond this certain line in the sand of when things are wrapped up, and it just doesn't seem procedurally like it'll work. Apparently that's not the case, right? Like when Chael Sonnen would always tweet out back in the day, like, I got my mouthpiece with me, like put me in, coach, on like fight day or whatever. You'd always be like, okay, you're just talking out of the side of your mouth. This is completely unrealistic, but you're just doing it for the clout, essentially. I guess not, right? I guess this can actually be done on this type of notice. And from what I see, from what I hear, like this was possible to do, mainly because Dan Ige had already had his medicals in Las Vegas, Nevada, that were good for like 6 months. He fought there in February. He was supposed to fight July 20th. I'll get into a little something about that in a sec. I believe you also need like an HIV test that's within 3 months or something like that. I assume he had that done. So like all the paperwork was lined up for him. He's of course based in Nevada as well. They probably had already licensed him for the July show. So this I think was just kind of like an anomaly in terms of how it worked out. I don't think a lot of people would have all those procedural things done leading up to it. But in addition to that, I was at Extreme Couture earlier in the week, and I was talking to Dan, and he was talking about his fight on July 20th, which was originally supposed to be against Sean Woodson, who like pulled out, same day he agreed to the fight or something. I don't think that had been out there. And then he agreed to fight Chepe Mariscal on that card. And so he was ready to go. Like, he was in camp. He'd also told me he offered to fight Drew Dober at 155 in Denver on July 13th, which would be a week before he was supposed to fight on the 20th. So this guy was ready to go. He was ready to move up. His weight was under control. So like, it's not like he was literally coming off the couch in terms of like preparation. I alluded to it earlier. He might've been more physically prepared in terms of days trained than Diego Lopes was for this particular night. So I'm fine with how it all came together. Like, maybe it is a little sketchy. If he had gone out there and gotten knocked out in the first minute or two, I think we'd be having a different conversation. But he went in there, he fought his ass off, he won the 3rd round. So I can't really sit here and be like, this was negligent, this was embarrassing, this was reckless, all that type of stuff. Like, the performance kind of spoke for it in that regard. So crazy situation. I don't think this is going to be a routine thing, but under all the circumstances, it seems like things were done the right way from the weigh and all that type of stuff. I was fine with it, but yeah, not something that you want to see happening super often, and kind of interesting that UFC went that direction, right? Like, we've had times before. I remember Stefan Struve versus Matt Mitrione was pulled off a pay-per-view card. I think it was like UFC 274, maybe even way earlier than that, 174. And they just called the fight off, and you had a 4-fight pay-per-view. They could have done that. For some reason, they didn't hear, and Dan Ige fights.
Nice pull there. Yeah. Let me just push back a little bit on what I'm trying to say. I think we're on the same wavelength. You're saying if the planets line up, his coach was even in the building. If the planets line up, let's do it, but let's not make, because when I'm watching Tricoli last week, right? I mean, he looks so good. I mean, everyone looks good for about a minute, for a round and a half, and then he was just a sitting duck. It was a matter of time, and he got iced. Anthony Smith and Roman Dolidze just kind of took the starch out of the pay-per-view, because same thing, they're coming in there late notice. And I'm thinking, man, I'm not saying I want a 4-fight pay-per-view or anything like that, but I just felt like they could have just adjusted. And then I see Diego Lopes slow down considerably in round 3, and I'm not watching high-level MMA that I know these guys are capable of putting out. Hell, I'd love to see those guys over 25 minutes. I guess that's when it sets in on me. The walkouts are great and everything, but then, 3rd round, you're like, oh man, should they have done this? That's my point of view, and I think that's what others are saying as well.
Yeah. I mean, how bad was Anthony Smith versus Roman Dolidze? Those guys were not prepared. So
yeah. I'd just take those guys and say, hey, we'll see you at the Sphere or something like that, but let's see you at your best. I don't know. All right. Look, the NSAC also had a few other things this past week, some big news. Arman Tsarukyan. So you guys recall, as he's doing his walkout, he swings at a fan or something like that. And here's a tweet from Nolan King. Arman Tsarukyan has been suspended 9 months, retroactive to the fight itself. And he was fined $25,000 and $471.12 in fees by the NSAC for his hashtag UFC 300 altercation with a fan. His suspension can be reduced to 6 months if he produces a video for an anti-bullying campaign. I guarantee you he's going to do that, because it'll be just under the 6 months when he can challenge Islam Makhachev in Abu Dhabi. I kind of don't blame him, if that's what he does. And they've reduced fines and suspensions before, so it wasn't the craziest thing, but I saw the writing on the wall on that one. Any thoughts on that one, Goes?
As far as what the punishment is, I'm kind of so on it. I think the fine is really where you hit the fighter the most. The timelines sometimes just, they don't feel like really they hurt the fighters too much. But there's a lot I think you do have to lay down the law in a sense, because it's kind of dangerous to be a fan these days. The rails are falling, you're falling on top of people, fighters are hitting you. There's fights in the stands.
Right.
So I think you do kind of have to send a message a little bit to the fighters, like, hey, we need to chill out. There's a division between fans and fighters, but at the same time, fans get crazy, man. They do crazy things too. So I think the money is probably where you hurt them the most, because of the timelines and stuff like that. But I was kind of on the fence with it. I guess I'm okay with it.
Yeah, and then Igor Severino, you guys remember that deal, right? The biting. In his fight, he was immediately cut. Well, the NAC also gave the ruling on that. He's been suspended 9 months retroactive and fined $2,000, $471.12 in change. And those are for the fees by the NSAC for biting Andre Lima during a UFC fight on March 23rd. Even his opponent said, "Don't cut him, bring him back." It seems like he really was, sorry for his actions, but that's what the NAC decided. What's his deal? Is he going to come back, or is he forever gone? Do you guys know? Severino, anybody?
I mean, they said that he's not going to come back. Anything's possible. He's going to have to, I think, do some work and get some wins. I don't think this is like a Paul Daly situation where they're sitting up there being like, never, ever, ever. But
yeah, he looked pretty good, though. That's for sure when he fights.
He's been like outcasted from the freaking sport for this. And I know like it's obviously bad. It was a terrible thing to do, but yeah, I feel kind of bad for him. Loses his UFC career. Other promoters don't seem keen on signing him. Loses a nice chunk. I mean, that 2,000 doesn't seem a lot, but when you're only making 10 grand, it is a lot. So
it was a guy that played for Uruguay and Liverpool and eventually Barcelona. Luis Suarez. He used to bite people, but no problem. He just kept doing his thing. So I've seen this before. I think Ronda might have done it too in Anaheim.
They should have got him a Hannibal Lecter mask, though. He was doing it like every other week, wasn't he?
Exactly, man. He had like 3 biting incidents. All right, let's finish up here, guys. Like I mentioned in the intro, it was International Fight Week this past week. The UFC had a lot going on throughout the week, aside from the UFC 303, the event itself. Put some shine on something that took place this past week, or on someone. Someone did something that you like that perhaps might have got lost in the shuffle. All right, goes. What do you want to give some shine to?
Well, we got to speak to a lot of people at the UFC Fan Expo, and one that stood out for me was Amir Albazi, right? It's a name that on this show we're constantly bringing up, saying, don't forget about Amir Albazi. We finally got some clarification from him. He's going to be ready in September. I love his attitude. He seemed in great spirits. He understood what's happened while he's away, and he understands that he can't just march right back in and be at the front of the line. I love his attitude. Huh?
He kept it real.
He did keep it real, and I like that he kind of threw out the Demetrius Johnson thing and talked about. We kind of heard that a few times, right? What an honor it would be to fight somebody like that, to bring somebody like that back into the UFC. But I feel like maybe a year from now, beginning of next year, we're really going to be talking about this name a lot. I love this kid. I love the way he fights, and I think he's got a high ceiling.
Yeah, we were talking about Asakura signing with the UFC, bring back Kyoji Horiguchi and Hunter Campbell. If you're listening, man, make a move at Demetrius Johnson. I'd love to see him, man. Mike Bond, what do you want to give some shine to?
I'll shout out the UFC Hall of Fame. That was, every year kind of going to that. It's a nice thing to see the legends of the sport get honored, and this one in particular had some true, real legends: Mauricio Shogun Hua, Vanderlei Silva, Frankie Edgar, Ioanni and Jacek. Chael Sonnen was up there, had the shortest speech of the night, but probably the best one, completely off the cup, no prompter for Chael. So just to see all those people there, it's always an enjoyable experience. I know for some people it can be a little mundane or whatever, but I really like appreciating the history of the sport. Think it needs to be done more often from both the UFC and the fan side. So especially Shogun, like he was my first favorite fighter. One of the main reasons I got into following MMA, seeing all those pride fights back in the day, Vanderlei as well. So yeah, it was cool to see those guys get their recognition. And I know some people in the comments here, Karate Ted Tunes, asking about an update on James Vick, probably the worst knockout of the weekend in any combat sport. That was a real bad one over in Karate Combat. I don't have anything solid. I know he was, taken to the hospital. There's kind of rumors floating out there. I don't want to put too much credence into anything because I don't want to get like aggregated or anything. But yeah, hoping for the best for James Vick. That was a bad knockout.
Mike, I'm feeling you too, man, on the legends. Seeing Jens Pulver and Don Fry over at the Expo, that was cool. I think the UFC should bring more of them in. Mark Coleman was there as well. Fada, who would you like to highlight, or was there an event you'd like to highlight?
I'd like to highlight our colleague Mike Bond for getting everybody paid extra. I know he wanted two
Money
fight of the
Mike
nights.
Bond.
Money Mike Bond, there you go. He wanted 2 fight of the nights. Dana agreed, but he only saw one in Cub Swanson, Andre Fili. But everyone who got a finish got a bonus, minus Silva, who missed weight. But he did it at UFC 300, getting people paid big bank. Did it at 303. So I don't know. Maybe Dana White's not going to want Mike around in the pay-per-views anymore because he's taking all his money. But no, shout out. But anytime,
Well,
of course. Yeah,
either
I was
Mike
gonna say,
Bond's taking the money or the blackjack tables are. But Joseph Boza, he's giving a shout out to Paige Van Zant. She says she was impressive in her power slap debut. 30-25, I guess, against someone named Christine Woolmans. That's a good one, Joseph Boza. I watched a little bit of that as well. I thought she did well. She held her own for sure. I think she could be a star there. I'll just say the UFC Fan Expo had a great time. Saw a little bit of a dip in attendance, honestly. I don't know if that's the Conor McGregor effect. A lot of people planned on coming and they didn't. But either way, it's very, very, very well done. And I encourage everyone next year to go. I think you'd really, really like it. There was a lot of fighters around. There's a lot of things to do. And we had a great time at Radio Row, seeing a lot of friends from the industry. We ran into Mike. I haven't seen him in a while as well. So it's good times. And hopefully you all enjoyed the coverage that came from the Expo, the Hall of Fame, UFC 303. A big shout out to the whole team. And a big shout out for you to tune in every week, Mondays, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, to Spinning Back Clique. I know a lot of you told us, that you saw us over there, that you watched the show. Tell a friend, share it, share the replay. It's also available in podcast form over at Omni, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, you name it. And the super chats. Thank you all for starting something that we hope, will continue to grow. Obviously, that'll get you to the front of the row. And we know that anyone that invests in that obviously invests in the show. And we thank you for that. All right, we're out of here. Have a great day. Go out and be a champion. We'll talk to you next week.